I never meant to disappear from my family's life, but maybe disappearing was the only way to finally exist. For the first 8 years of my life, I was the center of my parents' world. They held my hand when we crossed the street, clapped at every school performance, and smothered me with bedtime stories and forehead kisses. Then Rachel was born early, small, fragile, and suddenly I became an afterthought. Everything revolved around her. The house had to be sterile. Every cough, every fever of hers sent my parents into a frenzy. They whispered around me, their worry forming a wall I could never break through. At first, I tried to help. I read to Rachel while she lay swaddled in blankets, thinking maybe if I was the best big sister ever, they'd love me again. But love turned into something with conditions. Shh, Sarah, Rachel needs rest. Go to your room, Sarah. Rachel isn't feeling well. Why do you always have to be so loud? Can't you see Rachel is struggling? By the time I turned 10, I had mastered the art of being invisible. I spent summers with relatives who didn't really want me, Christmases watching from the corner while my parents cooed over Rachel's every small achievement. I got straight, as not for praise, because none ever came, but because school was the only place I had any control. When I got into the University of Michigan on a full scholarship, I thought, for once, my parents might be proud, but they barely glanced up from Rachel's latest spelling bee trophy. That's when I knew they were never going to see me. So I stopped waiting. I left, built my own life, took my childhood knack for spotting real treasures from fakes and turned it into a career. It started in secondhand stores me, a broke college student flipping underpriced vintage jewelry on eBay. Then it turned into something much bigger, private consultations, authenticating diamonds for collectors. Before I knew it, my name was circulating in elite circles, whispered at high society auctions. But to my family, I was still a nobody working in a dusty antique shop. And honestly, I liked it that way. Until Thanksgiving. Rachel, my golden child sister, now an Instagram influencer, specializing in curated vintage aesthetics, red, thrifted knockoffs, had invited everyone to our parents' house. I should have said no, but some part of me, some stupid, lingering hope, thought maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Dinner was a performance. Rachel held court while my parents beamed at her like she hung the stars. I sat quietly, eating dry turkey, waiting for it to be over. Then Rachel smirked, stood, and clinked her wine glass. Everyone, I have a fun surprise. She grabbed my laptop from the counter, and with a few taps, my screen was projected onto the TV. At first, she was smug. I thought we'd see what Sarah's been up to in her little antique shop. She expected. What? A few $100 in my account? Proof I was struggling? Instead, the screen filled with figures millions. My portfolio, my client list. Signed NDAs from celebrities, royalty, billionaires. The room went dead silent. Then came the outrage. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. Sarah, how could you keep this from us? My father's face turned red. You let your family struggle while you hoarded money? Rachel just stared, jaw clenched, eyes wide. And I knew, in that moment, she hated me. Not because I was rich, but because I had done it without them, without their approval. I took a sip of wine, let the weight of their expectations crumble into nothing, and smiled. I don't owe you anything. And for the first time in my life, I meant it. Silence stretched across the dining room like a drawn-out breath. The weight of their stares pressed down on me, but for the first time, I didn't shrink beneath it. Rachel was the first to break. So that's it? You've been sitting on millions while mom and dad worried about their retirement? I laughed. Actually laughed. You mean the same parents who never once asked about my life? Who sent me away so they could hover over you? Rachel's mouth twisted. She was searching for some angle where she still came out on top. That's not fair. Oh, it's not? I set my wine glass down, my fingers steady. You went through my laptop, Rachel. Did you think I was broke? That I needed saving? Or did you just want to embarrass me? A flicker of guilt crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. I just thought it was weird. You never talk about your job. Now I know why you've been hiding money from your own family. Our mother wiped at her eyes, shaking her head. We sacrificed so much for you girls. We gave you everything. Everything. That word almost made me choke. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Everything? Really? Let's talk about everything. You sent me away every summer so Rachel wouldn't get overwhelmed. You barely acknowledged when I got a scholarship because Rachel had a spelling bee. My voice was calm even. And now you want to cut my success? That's not how this works. My father slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. We're your family, Sarah. You don't turn your back on family. I met his glare without flinching. You turned your backs on me first. For a moment, nobody spoke. The truth hung there, undeniable. Then, because she always had to be the center of everything, Rachel sighed dramatically. So what now? You're just gonna walk out and pretend we don't exist? I smiled, slow and sharp. No pretending necessary. I reached into my purse, pulled out a velvet pouch, and dropped it onto the table. The diamonds inside caught the light, scattering reflections across their stunned faces. There, I said. Pawn those wisely. Then I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out. The drive home felt surreal, like I was stepping out of one life and into another. My hands didn't even shake. I should have felt something: guilt, sadness, regret. Instead, all I felt was relief. By the time I reached my estate, a gated home with security cameras and a guard dog named Fortune, I knew one thing for sure: I was done. Done waiting for them to see me. Done hoping they'd change. The next morning, I blocked their numbers. Rachel, predictably, didn't take it well. First came the texts. Rachel, you're being dramatic. Call mom, she's crying. Rachel, seriously, Sarah, grow up. You don't just cut off family. Then the guilt tripping. Mom, I don't understand how you can do this to us. Dad, ungrateful. After everything we've done for you. And finally, the threats. Rachel, hope you enjoy your millions because you'll die alone. I stared at that last message for a long time before I deleted it. Rachel was right about one thing: I had money. But unlike her, I didn't need validation from strangers on the internet. I had built my life alone, and I was perfectly fine keeping it that way. Or so I thought, because 3 months later, Rachel rebranded herself as a luxury jewelry consultant. And that's when things got interesting. 3 months. That's how long it took for Rachel to go from bitter sister to self-proclaimed luxury jewelry consultant. I found out the same way everyone else did through Instagram. Her page, once filled with thrift store dresses and secondhand furniture, had transformed overnight. Now, it was all diamond rings, Cartier watches, and close-ups of necklaces she definitely couldn't afford. The bio, Rachel Sterling, luxury jewelry expert. DM for consultations. I snorted. The audacity. Rachel had never so much as glanced at a real sapphire, let alone authenticated one. But there she was, posing in front of glass cases, holding up magnifying loupes like she actually knew what she was doing. The captions made it even worse. Authenticity is everything. Don't be fooled by fakes. Helping my clients find the real treasures. Trust my expertise. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then, buried in the comments, I saw my name. Rachel Sterling, is this like what your sister does? Her response? Well, I learned from the best. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Learned from the best? Rachel had spent her entire life pretending my career didn't exist, and now she was riding my coattails? Fine. If she wanted to play this game, I'd let her. At first, I sat back and watched. Rachel booked clients, influencers mostly, looking for free jewelry advice. She did Instagram lives, waving around gold-plated necklaces like they were museum pieces. Her followers ate it up. And then she got bold. She started selling. I saw the first post late one night. Rare vintage Cartier bracelet, authenticated by me. Serious buyer's DM. I let out a slow breath. Rachel had no way of authenticating anything. If she was selling Cartier, it was either stolen or fake. A week later, I got my answer. An email popped into my inbox from a name I recognized, one of my longtime clients. A woman named Olivia Hastings. Old money. The kind of person who actually owned vintage Cartier. Subject, urgent, fake jewelry scam. I opened it. Sarah, I hope you're well. I wanted to ask something strange. Do you have a sister in the jewelry business? I recently purchased a Cartier bracelet from Rachel Sterling, who claimed to have authenticated it. Something about it felt off, so I had it appraised. It's a high-quality fake. I tried reaching out to her, but she's ignoring me. I don't expect you to fix. I just thought you should know. Best. Olivia, I closed my laptop and exhaled slowly. Rachel wasn't just faking expertise, she was outright scamming people. The next morning, I made a call. James, I said when my lawyer picked up, we have a problem. I forwarded Olivia's email, along with screenshots of Rachel's posts. Within an hour, a cease and desist was drafted and sent. Rachel Sterling was officially on notice. I expected her to back down, to delete her posts, go silent, and pretend none of it had happened. But I should have known better. Rachel didn't just ignore the letter, she doubled down. Her next Instagram story was a picture of my lawyer's email with the caption, "Haters gonna hate. Some people can't handle a little competition." That's when I knew. This wasn't going to end quietly. This was war. Rachel had always been reckless, but this was next-level stupidity. I could have ignored her influencer nonsense, let her play dress up with her fake jewelry and Instagram followers. But scamming clients, dragging my name into it, that was a different story. I had built my reputation on trust. My clients weren't just rich, they were powerful. The kind of people who sued over a bad glass of wine, let alone a counterfeit Cartier. So I did what I do best. I handled it. First, I sent a quiet message to Olivia. "Don't worry, this will be taken care of." Then I made some calls. The luxury world was small, and reputation was everything. It didn't take long to get Rachel's name circulating for all the wrong reasons. By the end of the week, whispers of her scam had spread through private collector groups, auction circles, and high-end boutiques. Then the real fallout began. Rachel's Instagram comments turned nasty. "Hey, I bought from you. Was my necklace fake too? Why aren't you answering your DMs? Wow, so you're a scammer? Gross." I watched in silence as her empire of smoke and mirrors collapsed. And then, finally, she reached out. The call came late at night, unknown number, but I knew exactly who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. Rachel, she didn't waste time. "What the hell did you do?" Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying. I leaned back against my couch, completely unfazed. "You mean, did I tell people you were selling fakes?" "No, Rachel. Your clients figured that out on their own." She inhaled sharply. "You ruined me." I almost laughed. "You ruined yourself." For the first time in our entire lives, Rachel had no comeback. No smug remark. No dramatic sigh. Just silence. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, "I didn't think it would go this far." And maybe, for a second, I believed her. Maybe she really hadn't thought past the free jewelry, the easy money, the validation. But that wasn't my problem to fix. I kept my voice even. "It's over, Rachel. I suggest you take down your page before someone sues." She sniffled. "Mom and Dad," I cut her off, "aren't my responsibility." Another silence. Then, quietly, she asked, "Is this really it?" For a moment, I thought about lying, telling her there was some way to fix this, that if she apologized, things could go back to the way they were. But I wasn't that girl anymore, so I told her the truth. Yes, she hung up. And just like that, Rachel Sterling disappeared. The next morning, her Instagram was gone. No more curated vintage aesthetics, no more fake luxury. Just nothing. I should have felt something: relief, satisfaction, closure. Instead, I just felt free. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living in Rachel's shadow. I was finally my own person. And that was worth more than any diamond in the world. Rachel vanished. No posts, no stories, no desperate attempts to claw her way back. Just radio silence. And yet, the damage she left behind still echoed. My mother tried calling. I let it go to voicemail. "Sarah, I know you're upset, but your sister is struggling. She made a mistake, but you don't just abandon family. Call me back." Delete. Then my father: "Rachel's in a bad place. She lost her business, her reputation, everything. Don't you think you've punished her enough?" Punished her? That one made me laugh. Rachel had done this to herself. And yet, here they were, acting like I was the villain. Like I hadn't spent my entire life being pushed aside so Rachel could shine. Like she hadn't stolen from people. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I had already said my piece. Days turned into weeks. My life, for once, was quiet. No Rachel, no family guilt, just work, travel, and fortune happily guarding my estate. Then, one evening, an email landed in my inbox. No subject, no greeting, just 2 lines. "I'm sorry. I don't know who I am without them. Rachel." The first stared at the screen for a long time. I thought about the little girl who used to follow me around the house, before she became my parents' entire world. Before I learned that loving her meant disappearing. She wasn't that girl anymore. And I wasn't the sister who kept waiting to be seen, so I did the only thing that felt right. I closed the email, and I didn't write back, because some doors, once shut, aren't meant to be reopened. And for the first time in my life, I was okay with that. Rachel's email stayed unread in my inbox. No response. No second message. Just silence. And that silence, it was a gift. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting. Waiting for an apology that never came. For parents who would never change. For Rachel to finally see me as more than a resource to exploit. I had let go. And the weight of it all, the years of being ignored, the resentment, the constant battle for space lifted like a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. One afternoon, months later, I walked into a private auction in Geneva. The room buzzed with the quiet hum of wealth, old money, new money, power in every glance. I was here for a rare piece, a sapphire necklace with a history as rich as its owner. As I settled into my seat, an older man beside me leaned over. "Sarah Sterling, right?" I gave a polite nod. "That's me." He smiled. "I heard about your sister." For a split second, my stomach tightened. But then he chuckled, shaking his head. Hell of a mess she made. Tried to fake her way into this world. Never works. I just smiled. No, it doesn't. The auctioneer called for attention. The bidding began. And just like that, Rachel was a footnote, a passing mention, in a world that had already moved on. That night, I sat on my terrace, a glass of wine in hand, fortune curled up at my feet. My estate stretched out before me, the city lights twinkling in the distance. Everything I had built, I had done alone, and I was proud of that. Rachel would figure out her own path, or she wouldn't. My parents would spin their own version of events, painting me as cruel, selfish, ungrateful. None of it mattered, because for the first time, I wasn't chasing love that had to be earned. I was living my own life, on my terms. And that was the greatest revenge of all. Story 2. On the day of our wedding, my brother deceived my ex-fiancée into thinking I had cheated, according to this account. They took him seriously. Years later, I received a note from my mother. "Hello, everyone. Prior to starting today's video, I need your assistance. One of the greatest ways you can help us out is to subscribe, since we've observed the channel is losing some of its popularity. It's simple, free, and helps us continue to provide you with amazing content. Your assistance is much appreciated. Together, let's continue to build this channel. Many thanks. Let's begin the video now." All right, Reddit, this will take a while. I've been sitting on this tale for years, but after what occurred this week, I need to get it off my chest. Also, this is my throwaway account, because some individuals involved know my primary I. 32 male, grew up in Minnesota, one of those mid-sized towns where everyone knows everyone else's business, but pretends they don't. You know the type where the biggest issue is generally which neighbor neglected to trim their lawn, or who got caught speeding by the one traffic camera in town. My family was quite ordinary. Middle-class dad worked as a construction foreman. Still does, really, and mom's worked at the local library so long they dedicated a reading nook after her. Then there's my younger brother, Jake, 29 male, but we'll get to him. Oh boy, will we get to him. Growing up, Jake and I were what you'd call differently driven. It was my responsibility. Not as a genius, a flawless child, or anything. Just typical. Received occasional A's and B's. Played baseball. I made varsity my junior year, but I largely sat on the bench and spent my weekends at Uncle Pete's car shop studying about automobiles. Uncle Pete was a traditional mechanic. You know, the type who could listen to an engine and figure out what was wrong. When I was 15, he took me under his wing, taught me how to do everything from transmission repair to oil changes. I probably avoided a lot of trouble because of those weekends spent in the store. But where do I even begin, Jake, man? He was unique all the time, in a way that occasionally makes the hair on the back of your neck rise up, not in a funny, cutesy way. He had to be the focus of attention all the time. Like if I got a B+ on an exam, he'd suddenly have these elaborate anecdotes about how his instructor thought he was the smartest kid they'd ever taught. Spoiler alert, they didn't. He would start informing everyone that he was being scouted for a top soccer team if I made it to varsity baseball. He wasn't even on the school team. It was tiring, but we all just kind of rolled with it. After high school, that's how Jake became the family motto. I did what most youngsters in our community did. studied business management at the nearby community college. Since, it seemed useful, Jake, in the meantime, did what he does best, began powerfully and ended gloriously. He persuaded our parents to cover his tuition at this upscale private university. Before leaving, 2 states stayed for precisely 1.5 semesters, claimed that the professors were incapable of handling his creative energy or some other bullshit, such as that. Our parents, dude, here's when things become frustrating. When it came to Jake, they always had this strange blind spot. Each time he made a mistake, they were prepared with a reason for his absence. He's figuring things out because he was unable to maintain employment. He is too imaginative for conventional work. He never paid back the money he borrowed and stole. He's simply going through a difficult time. At the same time, I was working really hard at this furniture distribution firm, moving up from the warehouse floor. I began by studying every aspect of the business while working in shipping and receiving. The task wasn't glamorous. A lot of hard lifting, inventory management, and interacting with drivers. However, it was truthful, came with advantages, and I excelled at it. After 3 years, he was promoted to assistant manager, which isn't bad for someone with only a community college degree. I lived in my own apartment. Good vehicle, 2015 Civic. Simple yet dependable, with enough funds to begin considering the possibility of purchasing a home in the future. For a time, life was actually quite pleasant there. In addition to my regular work during the week, I occasionally assisted Uncle Pete with weekend projects at the shop, went to O'Malley's on Thursdays for trivia night, and watched Vikings games with my friends. The dating scene was okay, nothing serious, but at the time, I wasn't really searching for anything important. Jake would flit in and out of our life, generally when he needed money or a place to stay after his latest entrepreneurial attempt failed. He made every effort. He lost all of his money when he started a YouTube channel, got 3 followers, and sold some dubious supplements. That was probably a pyramid scam. In 2016, Jake got to know Sarah at a charity function. She worked as a pediatric nurse. Stunningly beautiful. Not like an Instagram influencer, though. That's more like it. Natural isn't even aware of her beauty. Quite intelligent as well. She spent approximately 20 minutes telling my dad about a new treatment they were utilizing at the children's hospital when I first met her, which was over Sunday dinner at our parents' house. Her genuine concern for her patients was evident. Wasn't only doing it to get paid. The strange thing was that no one could understand her relationship with Jake. I mean, this woman was in control of her life. Excellent work. She lives in her own apartment. Work at the animal shelter as a volunteer. The entire bundle. Jake, however, was just Jake. He had recently failed at launching a high-end dog walking business. Warning. After walking precisely 2 dogs, he decided it was beneath him and moved into our parents' basement to wait for his next great idea to come to fruition. However, they managed to stay together for 3 years. Those 3 years were a masterclass in warning signs that we all chose to ignore, Guy. Sincerely, I'm not even sure why anymore. Jake had an almost unpleasant obsession with her. Even though she urged him not to, he would bring lunch to her workplace because he had to know where she was at all times. If she went out with her friends without him, it seemed strange. He would write lengthy, meandering Facebook status updates about how she was everything to him. The type of stuff that, although lovely when you're 14, quickly becomes eerie when you're 30. He would get into these moods where he would sulk for days because Sarah would hardly even enjoy these articles. His behavior during family get-togethers was the true kicker. If Sarah was conversing with another person, our 80-year-old neighbor, Miss S. Peterson, might be anyone. Then Jake would show up out of nowhere and start talking. He would either start talking over whoever Sarah was speaking to, or wrap his arm around her waist in a very possessive manner. My cousin Matt once questioned Sarah about several medical matters. He was considering going to nursing school, and Jake was standing between them like a crazy bouncer. I made one attempt to discuss it with my parents. "Oh, he's just so in love with her," Mom remarked. After muttering something about today's youth, Dad resumed watching the game. Sarah's pals appeared to be worried as well. I tried to discuss Jake's conduct with her when I overheard them at a BBQ, but she dismissed my attempt. Then came 2019 Memorial Day. It's strange that you may wake up on a typical day and have no idea that your entire life would change by the end of the day. It was simply going to be another family cookout. Dad was at the grill, burning burgers and making sure they were charred to perfection. Everyone was simply lounging in the backyard as Mom fussed over her potato salad. It was unusual for Sarah to stay silent all day. Jake was peacocking as usual, informing everyone about his new venture. Artisanal pet rocks, perhaps. I don't shit you. Sarah abruptly got up as we were all seated around the patio table. She was wearing this expression. Scared, but kind of determined. She just dropped the bomb after clearing her throat. I have something to say. Sarah seldom really spoke up like that, so when she said that, everyone fell silent. Mike is the other person I have feelings for. What the fuck? I started coughing uncontrollably and choked on my beer like a full-on spit take. I had never shown Sarah that I was interested in her, and I mean never. Hell, only a month prior, I had assisted Jake in organizing their anniversary meal. You could practically feel the hush that followed. The sound of ice melting in people's beverages was audible. Next, Jake. Man, oh man, Jake lost it. He stood up so quickly that he knocked over his chair and began yelling that he had always sensed a connection between us. How I had been attempting to take her from the start. Veins were popping in his neck, spittle was flying everywhere, and he was directly in my face. Sarah simply stood there with this strange, composed face as she watched everything unfold. This is precisely why I'm going, she added, turning to face Jake. You have to be at the center of everything. She picked up her handbag and left, simply departed. After that, the party essentially collapsed. Jake hurried to his hideout in the basement. Mom was in tears. As he grilled additional burgers, Dad became anxious. That night, no one was going to eat. Sarah texted Jake to formally end their relationship. On everything, she blocked him. Complete digital scorched earth. She then attempted to reach me on Facebook, but I quickly blocked her. I sent her a brief message. I have no interest in it. Don't get in touch with me again, please. And also blocked her. Whatever game she was playing, I had no interest in participating. This is where everything started to go haywire. Jake became totally disconnected during the first 2 weeks following Sarah's departure. He refused to answer the phone, wouldn't leave the basement, and spent his days ordering deliveries and playing video games. Naturally, Mom was really anxious, but I reasoned that he simply needed time to take it all in. I was mistaken, man. He wasn't hiding. He had a plan. At first, it was so faint that I nearly believed I was dreaming. For example, my friend Mike no longer invited me to join him for our weekly Sunday football game. I asked him what was going on when I ran into him in the grocery store. He became strange and indicated that he didn't want any drama. Jake revealed to him that I had been making fun of his new truck behind his back, claiming that he was making up for something that was completely untrue. I had even assisted Mike in selecting the F-150, and he had received a fantastic bargain on it. Then, my pal Chris became aloof. Later, I discovered that Jake had persuaded him that my purpose in hanging out with him was to gain a deeper relationship with his sister, who, incidentally, was happily married and resided in Florida. These little friendship bombs continued to detonate one after another. Jake's falsehoods were the worst. Didn't even have to be logical. He simply repeated them over and over until people began to think they may be true. Jake, however, wasn't content to merely interfere with my social life. Oh no, he also had to target my employment. By now, I had spent 5 years working at the furniture distribution facility. I progressed from truck unloading to shipment supervisor, had a strong team, a solid rapport with management, and so on. Then the whispering started. Little things were involved at first. Someone said they had heard. I was looking for work, not a huge deal. You do realize that people are constantly searching for greater opportunities? The rumors worsened after that, though. There were rumors that I was selling things out of the back door and manipulating inventory statistics. Tom, my longtime coworker, began going over all of my documents again. I could sense he was observing me more intently than before, but he never said out. I heard 2 of my coworkers conversing in the break room one day. They were talking about how someone had accused me of disparaging the business to our rivals and attempting to take our clientele with me when I departed. I wanted to storm in and defend myself, but I was at a loss for words. My insane brother is spreading false information about me. Yes, that would have been very warmly received. The absurd part is that Jake wasn't even employed in my field. Although he was unfamiliar with our clients or rivals, he was skilled at sowing uncertainty. He would engage in conversation with salesmen who visited the warehouse and delivery drivers. Even used LinkedIn to connect with a few of our frequent clients. Simply banter that invariably descended into worries about me. I made an effort to discuss the situation with my parents, showed them texts from pals I had lost contact with, described the working environment. Do you remember what my mother said? Jake's simply having a hard time right now, honey. When he's angry, you know how he gets. Give him some time. Dad simply groaned and shifted the conversation to the Vikings' most recent losing skid. That year's Christmas was the true kick in the teeth. I had been putting money aside to get this girl a unique present. I had begun to see. I still had some belongings at our parents' place, and I had $500 in cash in my desk drawer. When I brought up the missing money at our family Christmas dinner, Mom really suggested that perhaps Jake had borrowed it and had forgotten to notify you. Taken out? Who takes money without asking from a closed desk drawer? The problem with Jake's retaliation effort, however, is this. It was more than simply hurting me. It has to do with loneliness. He turned against me and drove away all of my friends and coworkers. With his falsehoods, he poisoned every member of the family. Making ensuring I had nowhere to go was the main goal when his big move eventually came. And he had a major move planned, guy. His patience with it all is what irritates me. This wasn't your typical irate ex-boyfriend snapping. This was computed. He laid the foundation for months, perhaps a year, positioning his pieces in a kind of twisted chess game, and I simply kept assuming that he would move on. Finally, he'll go on. About 8 months after the Sarah event, I can still recall this one night. After work, I was enjoying a beer at O'Malley's, our neighborhood bar. Jake and a few of his mates entered. I hadn't seen him out in a long time. He behaved quite normally. Came over, said hey, even bought me a beer. In fact, I had the feeling that things could be improving. Perhaps he was finally letting it all go. God, I was such a fool. Because my younger brother was actually laying the groundwork for the next stage of his scheme. As I sat there believing he was finally maturing, he presented this woman as a former college acquaintance. Yes, she would have a significant role later on, but that will be covered in more detail soon. God, I was such a fool. Thus, in October 2020, I got to know Emily. In all honesty, I nearly skipped the wedding where we first met because of all that had transpired with Jake's revenge campaign. Emily was doing my cousin Annie's hair for her wedding. Since they had grown close over the years, Emily was invited to the wedding itself rather than merely handling the bridal party's hair. At the time, I was in a quite dire situation. The majority of my former acquaintances had fallen for Jake's lies. All of the rumors made work unpleasant, and I essentially turned into a recluse who only left the house to go to work and buy food. Mom insisted that I make amends with Jake as if I were the one who needed to make things right. In order to deal with everything, Dad had started to leave the room whenever a disagreement arose. This refurbished barn outside of town served as the wedding location. I was seated at the table for random singles, calculating how many minutes it would take me to get out without coming out as impolite. Emily was holding 2 slices of wedding cake and wearing this green outfit when she sat down beside me. She put one dish in front of me and said, "You seem like you could use some sugar treatment just like that." After we started conversing, it was simple. Sometimes when you meet someone, there is actual communication instead of uncomfortable small chat or attempts to impress one another. Emily was that person. She had this modest salon downtown, adored documentaries about genuine crimes. He had this extremely dry sense of humor that totally matched mine, and we debated inventing a murderer for a long time. She explained to me how she had started her company from the ground up, first performing haircuts in her undergraduate apartment before saving up enough cash to acquire a facility of her own. When I told her about my job in the warehouse, she wasn't bored, rather. She asked some really insightful questions about management and logistics. She had been yearning to learn the fundamentals of auto care, so when I told her that I assisted my uncle with cars on the weekends, her eyes glowed. The thing about Emily that I didn't realize until much later is this. I'd pushed it off for as long as possible, but she was incredibly excellent at reading people, like scary excellent when she first met Jake. She was able to see through him. This occurred at Thanksgiving of 2020. A month or so into our relationship, Jake was acting in his typical manner, overly gregarious, making up tales and attempting to steal the show. With a puzzle-solving expression on her face, Emily simply observed him. Your brother's got some serious issues with you, doesn't he? She remarked, dragging me aside after dinner. I'm not passing judgment, just watching. She didn't believe I was being paranoid as everyone else did when I told her about the Sarah incident and all that transpired. In fact, that is the reason Jake detested her so much. I don't believe he was able to control her. He used his typical strategies, telling her unsettling things about me in an attempt to raise suspicions, but Emily would just confront him, like as during a family supper. Jake began narrating how he had heard me disparaging Emily in front of my coworkers. Emily simply looked him in the eye and replied, "Jake, that's a pretty serious accusation," without becoming agitated. "Would you mind telling me from whom you heard this?" He shifted the topic after stuttering something about safeguarding his sources. After that, our relationship progressed really quickly. I began spending more and more time at Emily's little apartment above her salon. It served as a sort of sanctuary away from the chaos Jake had brought into my life. We would spend hours talking, cooking supper, and watching documentaries. I showed her how to check her tire pressure and change her oil, and she taught me about the chemistry of hair color, which is really intriguing. 6 months after our first meeting, I proposed. That sounds extremely quick, I know. But when you know, don't you? After hours, I completed it at her salon. I had this entire scenario planned in which I acted as though I needed a haircut, and I had the ring in my hand when she spun me around in the chair, so I was facing the mirror. She roared with laughter, then nodded. Jake definitely stepped up his game at that point. He seemed to find my happiness unbearable. At work, the gossip grew more intense. He began frequenting Emily's salon as a client and making strange remarks to her other customers. He even attempted to file a false health code violation report against her with the state board. She had to cope with an inspection, but nothing came of it. Emily managed everything with such elegance. She simply records everything, document his harassing, remain professional. He's attempting to get us to respond. Don't give him the satisfaction, she would advise. That made me adore her even more. We set the wedding date for June 2021. In retrospect, I should have seen that Jake would not allow that to occur without attempting anything. However, I was preoccupied with wedding preparations. I overlooked all the warning flags because I was so enamored with Emily. But Emily saw them. She continued emphasizing that Jake's abrupt shift to supporting our marriage seemed strange. I ought to have paid attention to her. God, I ought to have paid attention. I think the last time I felt really at ease was the night before my wedding. Isn't that strange? You're sitting there, eating pizza and watching reruns of The Office, totally ignorant, as if your entire life is about to fall apart. I chose to stay at the Holiday Inn close to the event location. To be honest, I just wanted some peace and quiet, while Emily and her bridesmaids were doing the customary thing at her parents' house, preparing for the wedding, handling family conflicts, and attempting to control Jake's increasingly unpredictable conduct had taken up the previous few months. In retrospect, there were a lot of warning signs in the weeks before the wedding. Jake had suddenly gotten helpful, like strangely helpful. He had promised to deal with some of the vendor correspondence and to work with the hotel to arrange room blocks, even assisted Mom in setting up the seats. I believed at the moment that he had finally matured. Perhaps he realized he needed to let go of his resentment after witnessing Emily and I so happy. But Emily didn't believe it. There's a problem. I dismissed her constant complaints that he was being too kind, told her that the wedding was the only thing causing her worry. God, what a fool I was. I got buffalo wings and pepperoni pizza from this neighborhood restaurant close to the motel that last night. My phone began exploding with last-minute wedding inquiries, so I turned it off. I recalled how pleasant it felt to simply be at peace for a time. I even kept a tiny diary that Emily gave me. She felt that recording our adventure together would be pleasant. I expressed my excitement to begin our life together in my most recent blog. The following morning began rather routinely. One of the few people who had supported me through Jacobs throughout the years, Dave, my best man, stopped by to help me get ready. Pretending he hadn't already misplaced the rings twice that morning, we were making jokes around him. The weather was great. It's one of those uncommon June days in Minnesota that isn't overly hot or muggy. I arrived early to the church. Downtown, Emily and I had decided on this lovely ancient Presbyterian church. Dark wood with stained glass. Emily had fallen in love with the building, not because we were especially devout. Her parents arrived as I stood in the foyer, fiddling with my tie for the umpteenth time. They didn't say anything when they passed me. I initially believed they may not have seen me, but then I saw Mrs. Carter. Emily's mother was in tears, sad tears on a wedding day. These were not like the others. It appeared as though Mr. Carter wanted to strike someone or anything. At that moment, I noticed Jake and this woman standing close to the church office. I knew who she was right away. She was the longtime college buddy he had met months prior at O'Malley's. Jake got this expression on his face as she showed Emily's parents something on her phone. This empathetic, worried face made my stomach turn. Dave went to investigate after realizing something was amiss. White as a sheet, he returned. "You must see this, Mike," he said. However, Emily's father was in my face before I could even move. He had never seemed so furious to me. He opened his mouth to remark that he and Emily had both trusted me. I didn't know what he was discussing. He became much more irate when I attempted to inquire about the situation. Jake came up at that moment, looking unhappy and shaking his head. "Show him." "To the woman with me," he said. She extended her phone. A video, pictures, and texts purportedly showed me with her the previous evening. Someone who somewhat resembled me was entering her apartment complex in the footage. 11:43 p.m. was the timestamp displayed. I began to clarify that I wasn't the one. Jake interrupted me after I had spent the entire night at the motel. "You weren't in your accommodation last night, as the hotel has already confirmed." "Oh," he said. "One more untruth. However, how might I demonstrate it?" After entering, I switched off my phone and didn't use my key card all night. After that, everything happened so quickly. Emily had seen it all, someone remarked, and gone. The wedding was being called off by her mother. There was a family emergency. The visitors were informed. Jake was present the entire time, portraying the heartbroken brother who had to reveal his own treachery. Emily's bridesmaids created a barricade in front of the door as I tried to get to the bridal room to speak with her and explain. One of them, Katie, her best friend, simply asked, "Haven't you done enough?" while glaring at me. My calls and texts went unanswered by Emily. If I didn't leave, her father threatened to contact the police. My own parents watched in silence as everything collapsed. Jake as well. He was soothing Emily's family, telling them how sorry he was, how he'd had no option but to inform them when he found out. I spent hours sitting in my apartment trying to process what had happened after driving home in my wedding suit. Emily's number was disconnected after I called and texted her. All of her friends had blocked me when I tried to persuade them to listen. Even visited her salon the next day. Her appointments were already covered by someone else, though. What was the worst part, do you know? That day, I never even saw her. I was never able to express to her how stunning she must have looked in her gown. I never had to justify myself, give an explanation, or stand up for us. Everything we owned, all of our plans. That night, it simply disappeared within 1 hour. I eventually checked social media while sitting by myself in my apartment, still dressed in my wedding suit. Jake had previously shared his heartbreak for Emily, and the fact that sometimes the ones we trust the most turn on us. There was a lot of hate for me and support for him and Emily in the comments. That evening, I erased all of my social media accounts. I applied for a transfer to our Denver facility the next week. I left after 2 weeks. In those films, when a character's life breaks apart, a montage of them relocating to a new city and starting over is shown. They make it seem so simple. A happy ending occurs when the guy finds a new job, a great apartment, and new pals. That isn't at all how reality is. Since it was the farthest warehouse position available, without requiring a salary reduction, I accepted the relocation to Denver. I just departed after packing everything I owned into my Civic. Didn't even visit my parents' house to bid them farewell. In order to prevent my mother from reporting me missing or whatever, I texted her as I reached the Colorado state border. Denver's initial months were a unique type of misery. After breaking my lease back home, I was only able to afford this little studio apartment in a less desirable area of town. I continued attempting to determine the precise moment Jake began organizing everything. Was it earlier, when Emily and I were engaged? Had he always known that woman at O'Malley's? Every recollection became clouded by uncertainty. Jake was really skilled at that, causing you to doubt your whole history in addition to ruining your present. The work went nicely. Work was work. The warehouse in Denver was larger than the one at home, more businesslike. No one was aware of my past. both positive and negative. Excellent, because I wasn't being followed by rumors. No strange glances, no hushed chatter. Unfortunately, I was all by myself. Are you aware of the difficulty of forming friendships in your 30s, particularly in a new location and with the type of mental baggage that would require therapy from a therapist? During my first year in Denver, I made a few attempts at dating. Just coffee dates from dating apps, nothing serious, but I was unable to accomplish it. I would freeze if a woman inquired about my background or family. How would you describe such a thing? In addition, my brother set on ruining my life and falsely accusing me of cheating on my fiancée on our wedding day. Yes, that is an excellent discussion to have on a first date. I still occasionally visited the website for her salon. In a non-stalker fashion, all I wanted to know was how she was doing. About a year after everything occurred, she renamed the establishment. Everything is new, including the logo. I suppose she too needed a new beginning. Although my parents made an effort to stay in contact, our discussions were usually superficial. They would discuss everything but Jake or the events, such as the weather or their garden. They never expressed regret for keeping quiet while he ruined my life. They probably didn't want to acknowledge that they had been enabling him all along. According to Mom's sporadic updates, which I never requested, but she sent nevertheless, Jake was, in the meantime, enjoying his best life back home. He had launched a social media consulting firm of some sort. Now that I think about it, there ought to have been another warning sign. Jake's unexpected success in anything. The anniversaries of all the minor dates that had held significance, not just the wedding that never happened, were the worst. Emily and I went on our first date that day, the day I made the proposal. Every one of them felt like a repeated stomach strike. According to Dr. Martinez, that was typical. There is no temporal limit to that anguish. It doesn't make it any less painful, though, to know that something is typical. One did succeed in creating a rather decent life in Denver, was elevated to the position of operations manager, relocated to a better flat. I joined a car restoration organization and made a few buddies, even took a shelter cat into their home. Yes, I am aware that Otto is a horrible name for a cat, but he arrived with it and won't take responsibility for anything else. My phone rang 3 years after I had left Minnesota. It was a typical Tuesday evening. I had just arrived home from work and was feeding my cat, Otto, when her number appeared on my phone. Nearly didn't respond. Over the years, our chats had become very dull. She only mentioned the weather and her garden, but there was something in her voice when she left a message that prompted me to give her another call. She was sobbing, which was normal for drama with Jake, but this time, it was different. Jake's girlfriend, it turned out. Do you recall how the woman at my wedding had finally lost it? Not in a dramatic confessional courtroom manner. She just started talking to the wrong person after getting wasted at a pub. Do you see Jake in this woman? Rebecca is her name. Prior to my wedding, they had been together for years. They had a habit of stirring up trouble at weddings and other gatherings, mainly involving wealthy individuals. They were little more than masterminds. Scammers of the garden variety who were fortunate a couple times. They would fabricate scenarios of infidelity and then occasionally try to coerce others into keeping silent about even worse things they say they own. Rebecca told this to the lady at the bar. One of their other victims' sister. This family, in contrast to me, didn't simply up and leave town. They dug, discovered patterns. Cheating the night before the wedding is the same narrative, the same kind of proof. When they began inquiring around, the same woman appeared with the same charges. There were other stories released as well. It turns out that we are aware of at least 3 additional instances in which Jake and Rebecca pulled this off. Not every wedding. Occasionally anniversary celebrations or even engagement parties. Always going after those who stood to lose. Emily discovered that they always used the same playbook because people speak and our town isn't very large. One of the other victim's relatives was one of her frequent customers, and news quickly spread to Emily once they discovered how nicely the stories matched. I won't pretend that when Emily emailed me initially, there was a huge, dramatic altercation. My job address was most likely discovered on LinkedIn or another site. It wasn't long. I was just wondering if we could speak, claimed to be aware of Jake's actions, that she had been mistaken. She apologized. Took 3 days for me to reply. How can you respond to such a thing? This downtown coffee cafe is where we first met. Not the one we visited before. We didn't need such recollections. She had changed appearance, perhaps older, had a gray stripe in her hair. She didn't want to die. She started by moving a folder across the table, copies of text messages that Rebecca had sent while intoxicated to other persons boasting about their schemes, screenshots of related articles that were shared in a few local Facebook groups. Just enough to demonstrate a trend, but nothing that would stand up in court. The actual kicker? Jake hadn't even tried to hide it with any care. Although he was careless with the paperwork, he would finance his consulting firm with the proceeds from their blackmail efforts. Rebecca had saved all the receipts. She literally had a notepad filled with dates, quantities, and goals. I suppose she didn't believe Jake wouldn't let her down either. When she apologized, Emily started crying, said she ought to have been more aware. At least they ought to have listened to me. To be honest, I was just exhausted, but I wanted to be mad with her. I told her that I could see why she thought so. Jake had been putting it together for months, making it appear authentic. Hell, by then, he had been practicing deceiving people for years. We caught up on the fundamentals of her salon's operations throughout our perhaps hour-long conversation. Well, she attended the community college and took some business classes. I informed her about my car work in Denver. I suppose it was pleasant, although somewhat vacant. We have changed as individuals. Jake won't be going to jail or something like. The majority of what they did is covered by the statute of limitations, and she stated that it was all essentially what he claimed. However, now that people are aware of who he truly is, his business is collapsing and his reputation in the community has been destroyed. I think you should migrate to Michigan or Wisconsin, Rebecca. I'm not particularly interested in keeping track. My folks are attempting to take it all in. Dad is acting in his typical taciturn manner. Mom keeps phoning to say she's sorry. They're done allowing Jake, but they're not selling their house or anything. He returned to their basement when I last heard from him, which in a way feels like retribution. Tomorrow I'll be returning to Denver. You have a life to lead, a warehouse to manage, and a cat to feed. Emily wanted to stay in contact. Perhaps you will become buddies in the future. I informed her that I needed time to consider it. Some fractures don't heal completely. Prior to my departure from the coffee shop, this journal, which she had discovered while organizing her salon's storage area, was returned to me. Before the wedding, I had written in one. I haven't yet opened it. I'm not sure I will. Edit. I appreciate all of your help, folks. Yes, Otto is doing well. At the motel right now, he's attempting to bite my shoelaces. Second edit. Many of you are inquiring as to whether I intend to sue Jake. Not worth the trouble, to be honest. Living a good life is sometimes the finest kind of retaliation. Third edit. Give up looking for Rebecca's social media profiles. No one is being helped by it. Story 3. My husband sent me a picture of himself and his 23-year-old girlfriend at our vacation house, along with divorce papers via email. I quietly drank my morning coffee and said, "The house is mine now. Are you certain of that?" And disabled both his email and phone. Little did he know, it was 7:15 a.m. I was in Nashville when I got the email that broke my heart. Unaware that her father had just blown our lives up with a single message, my 1-year-old daughter, Emma, was blissfully chattering in her high chair. The topic line was straightforward. Let's go on. When I opened the attachment and saw the picture, I nearly spilt my coffee. My spouse of 5 years, Donald, encircled a young, blonde woman who couldn't have been more than 23. Our lake cottage, a vacation property we purchased only a year ago, was in front of them. It was the same house where we had spent many weekends discussing our future plans. The email said, "I now own the house. I've already moved in with Amber. My lawyer will be sending over the divorce papers. Don't struggle with it. I am the owner of the deed." I felt my hands trembling as I placed down my coffee mug. Not out of terror, though. No, this was just my anger building. Donald genuinely believed that he could just give me divorce papers via email and take our vacation house, the house I had purchased with my business's earnings. He was unaware of what was about to happen. I observed our kid playing with her meal, still naive and joyful. I then took a quick look at the framed picture hanging on our kitchen wall. On our wedding day, Donald and I were beaming as if we had everything all out, 5 years of marriage. And he decided to finish it this way, with a picture of himself with a lady almost half my age and a smug email. I inhaled deeply before picking up my phone. Before I clicked block, my finger briefly lingered over Donald's contact details. I then opened my email and replied with 2 short sentences. Are you certain of that? You should thoroughly review the documentation. I smiled, clicked send, blocked his email, and turned back to my kid. I was constantly undervalued by Donald. He viewed me as the understanding spouse who had helped him with his profession while also starting my own side company. He likely assumed that I would cry and even plead with him to change his mind. But he had overlooked one important aspect of me. Being careless about safeguarding my assets did not lead to the success of my business. In hindsight, I should have anticipated this. There were signs. I ignored minor warning signs because I was too preoccupied with managing our new baby and my expanding business. Over the previous 3 months, Donald had been visiting the lake house on a regular basis for work, saying he required quiet time to work on a major corporate merger. I supported his professional decisions while starting my own business from the ground up. I was already operating a profitable internet store when we first met 6 years ago, but Donald pretended it was simply a fun pastime. He enjoyed sharing with others how he had assisted me in making it a reality. The reality? Since we were married, the worth of my business has tripled, all via my own hard work and strategic planning. I had thought of the lake home, the ideal retreat for our family. It's remote enough to feel like a true getaway, yet close enough to Nashville for weekend getaways. Donald had insisted on having his name appear on the deed for tax considerations, even though I had paid for it in full with the earnings from my business. He said that although I had consented, I had first had my lawyer prepare a number of extremely detailed paperwork pertaining to the real ownership of the property. Donald had been particularly aloof last week, using our home office phone for hours at a time. He became defensive when I questioned him about the merger, accusing me of not comprehending the intricacies of corporate economics. Rich, coming from a guy whose financial portfolio I'd secretly been managing for the previous 3 years, I took up Emma from her high chair and hugged her close, inhaling in her beautiful baby aroma. Her eyes were Donald's, but I was determined. It was already evident in the way she approached each new task. Now that I was looking at her, I was more determined. It was no longer just about me. It was also about safeguarding her future. With Emma on my hip, I made my way to my home office and turned on my laptop. I sent the paperwork indicating I had bought the lake house to my lawyer via email in a matter of minutes. Next, I viewed the stream from the security camera I had put on the property. Another safeguard Donald knew nothing about. Everything had been captured on camera. Each visit, each visitor, each betrayal. Amber may have been celebrating her win at the lake home, but she was unaware that she was the subject of a film that would play a significant role in my divorce case. It buzzed on my phone. Julia, my helper Rachel, texted me. "This is something you must see." A link to Amber's Instagram page was included. Dozens of pictures of her with Donald dated back months. She even wore my clothing and used my belongings in several of the photos that were taken in our bedroom at the lake house. In the most recent post, she was seen showing off a huge diamond band that belonged to my grandmother. Donald had promised that we would give Emma the ring on her 18th birthday. I was ill. This was not a new incident. Before Emma was even born, this had been happening. 8 months ago, Amber proudly displayed a key to the lake house in one of the pictures, reading "Home, Sweet Home," with my eyes and love heart, as a caption. Moving in together is a new phase. When our infant kept me up all night. A woman who had just graduated from college had been playing house with Donald. His professional travels coincided exactly with the dates on the pictures. He had always stated that he needed to check on the lake cottage, which was why he was working late every weekend. All of it had been false. My hands are trembling. I launched the banking app. The second blow came at that moment. I put money into a joint account for Emma's college fund, but it was empty. Every cent, almost $100,000, lost. Transferred out yesterday to an account I didn't recognize. The wrath I'd felt before turned into something cold and calculated. I phoned my bank immediately, then my lawyer. I had confirmation in an hour. For months, Donald had been methodically transferring funds in anticipation of this day. He had even attempted, but failed, to access my company accounts. At least those were safeguarded by separate financial systems and unbreakable contracts. I was talking to the attorneys on the phone when Rachel phoned. "Julia, there's more." A number of screenshots from Amber's private Facebook page were forwarded to me by her. The girl had been boasting to her pals about how she had found a wealthy older guy and how they intended to demand the full value of his uninteresting wife. Even jokes about how unaware I was and how preoccupied I was with my small internet store to see what was going on were included in the communications. They had no idea that my small internet store had tripled my fortune. In order to give Donald the impression that my company was only successful and not extremely profitable, I had kept that knowledge secret. He had never been able to examine my company's books well enough to fully comprehend what I had created because of his ego. I glanced at Emma, who was now soundly sleeping in her playpen. "Don't worry, darling daughter," I whispered. "Daddy is going to learn a valuable lesson from Mommy about the undervaluation of women in the corporate world." Over the following several hours, I was quite busy. Sarah, my lawyer, showed up to my house shortly before noon, and we sat in my home office going over paperwork. Emma and Rachel had a snooze upstairs while maintaining watch. I had increased the house's security. I had a feeling Donald wouldn't accept my email reply. He's not as smart as he believes, though. Looking over the Lake Home paperwork, Sarah said, "We have unquestionable evidence that your company's finances were used to buy the home, even if the deed is in his name. The contracts, the transfer documents, and even the emails in which he acknowledges that it was your money. Everything is here." I pulled up my laptop security camera feeds and nodded. "There's more. Take a look at this." Throughout the previous months, the video captured Donald and Amber coming inside the lake house at different occasions. However, Sarah was particularly intrigued by the video that was shot 2 days ago. It included Donald hauling box after box of household goods, including a few artworks I had bought with the money I made from my business. Sarah noted that it was an attempt to steal company property. "For tax reasons, the art collection was bought via your business. The paperwork is with us." At that moment, a call from an unidentified number appeared on my phone. I switched it to speaker mode. "Don't you think you're really intelligent?" Donald's tone was abrasive and irate. "Julia, check your work email. My solicitors have also been quite busy." I felt sick to my stomach as I opened my email. In an emergency petition, Donald's solicitors claimed that my company was founded on his contacts and experience. During the divorce process, they were requesting temporary control of my company's finances, as well as a thorough audit. "You would make a sincere effort to keep me company." My heart was pounding, but I spoke steadily. "I founded the business before I ever met you. You constructed." He chuckled icily. "Who do you believe provided you with all of these business contacts? Who put you in touch with the appropriate people? Without me, Julia, you would be nothing." Amber is aware that she knows how to express gratitude. Sarah was already typing frantically on her laptop when I turned to her and silenced the phone. She gestured with her finger. "Hold on, Donald." The phone was unmuted by me, purchasing time. "Give your actions a lot of thought." "Yes. My solicitors will contact me regarding Emma as well. You can't be a good mother because you're too preoccupied with your valuable business. Amber gets along well with children. She was a nanny once. The idea of taking Emma chilled my blood, but Sarah brought her laptop to me before I could reply. A 3-year-old email that Donald had sent to a buddy bemoaning my success was displayed on the screen. "She doesn't need my assistance because she will not even consider my business advice." She is correct. Her business is now worth more than my yearly wage. It's embarrassing. Into the phone, I grinned. "I just emailed your lawyer something, Donald. Before threatening my business further, you might want to ask him, what are you discussing? Let's pretend you didn't realize how private your email archives were. Call off your solicitors, or I'll send your boss an email next. What would he think of all those business relationships you say you've given me?" There was silence on the queue. Next, click. Rachel rushed into the office with a pale face as Sarah was still going through Donald's emails. "You must see this immediately, Julia." She pushed her iPad across from me. A draft press statement from Donald's business announcing his elevation to Chief Financial Officer, effective next month, was shown on the screen. All of a sudden, everything fell into place. The aggressive legal campaign, the deliberate actions with our finances, and the timing of his romance with Amber. It was more than simply abandoning me. Prior to his major promotion, he was cleaning house in an effort to protect his assets and reduce the amount of money he would lose in a divorce. There's more. Rachel flipped to a different page. "Amber is not your typical girlfriend. She is the niece of the CEO." It seemed as though someone had hit me in the stomach. There was no younger lady that Donald had fallen in love with. In order to get promoted, he had planned a connection with the CEO's niece, the stolen money, the lake mansion, including the Emma-related threats. All of this was part of his plan to begin a new life with his ideal, well-connected young bride as a CFO. Sarah raised her head from her computer. I discovered something else, Julia. Donald has been involved in the corporate merger. One of your main rivals in business is involved. He will have access to information that might cause significant harm to your business if he is appointed CFO. I balled my hands into fists. Donald wasn't only attempting to harm me. He was setting up shop to demolish everything I had constructed. I thought about all those nights he'd spent in his home office claiming to be working on merger agreements. Instead, has he been looking through my business files? Verify the activities on my home network. I informed Rachel. Pay attention to any efforts to get access to my company's servers. Sarah discovered something more while Rachel was at work. Take a look at these 6-month-old emails that Donald and Amber exchanged. Even before Emma could walk, they were making plans for this. Amber wrote, "We can utilize the insider knowledge to force Julia's business out of the market once you're CFO. Uncle Robert promises to assist." The thought of them conspiring against me while I was taking care of our newborn baby made me feel nauseous. However, they had become careless due to their conceit. They had left a trail of evidence that may damage the CEO's reputation, in addition to Donald's advancement. My thoughts were interrupted by Rachel's words. I located it. Donald's laptop made many attempts to access your company's servers. Although he tried, he was unable to breach your security. Corporate espionage is what that is. I got up and went to the window to see Emma play with her favorite plush elephant in her playpen. Donald believed he was very smart for securing his future through his connection with Amber. However, he had overlooked the most crucial business lesson. Sarah, you should never undervalue your opponent. I consult my lawyer once again, write a letter to the board of directors of the firm, and include proof of Donald's attempted corporate espionage and the CEO's use of insider knowledge against a rival. Include the security tape showing Donald robbing the lake cottage of business property. How about Amber? Rachel inquired. I grinned glumly. The way their CEO employed a family member to assist in planning corporate espionage would likely pique the board's curiosity. Do you not? My phone rang with a lake house security system alarm just as we were getting ready to send the email to the board. Donald had returned, and he was not by himself. Amber was not alone with him. Her uncle Robert, the CEO, was also present. They entered the house carrying boxes. More of my stuff, of course. Watching the live broadcast, I encouraged Sarah to wait. Let's first observe their actions. We could see them in the living room through the security cameras. The sound was really clear, another element that Donald was unaware of. Glasses in hand, they were enjoying champagne. For the aspiring CFO, to Donald and my lovely niece who made it all possible, Robert lifted his glass. Julia doesn't know what's going to happen. Donald chuckled. The board will announce my promotion tomorrow morning, and by the afternoon, our legal team will have access to her company's financial records for auditing purposes. Her business will be useless in a month. What's the best part? Amber added her voice. Her biggest issue, in her opinion, is the lake house. Hold off until she learns of the offshore accounts. I went cold. Rachel, what? Offshore accounts? Rachel tapped her keyboard quickly. Her face darkened in a matter of minutes. Located them. For months, Donald has been transferring funds from your joint accounts to foreign assets, not just the money for Emma's college. Somehow, he was able to divert about $300,000. I didn't realize how big this was. Donald wasn't only preparing to abandon me. For months, he had been routinely robbing our family. The drama surrounding the lake home was only a diversion from his larger plan. Robert then uttered something that chilled me to the bone. Once Julia's firm tanks, our merger goes through effortlessly. Our subsidiaries will share her market share, and her problematic ethical business model will be a thing of the past. In addition to becoming profitable, my company's dedication to fair labor and ecological methods was upending their whole sector. This went beyond Donald's romance and his promotion. Because it endangered their economic model, they sought to demolish what I had constructed. I instructed Sarah to send the email, but first add one more item. Go to Emma's birthday backup server password and attach the mark insurance file. When Sarah opened the file, her eyes sprang wide. It had years' worth of records regarding dubious activities at Donald's business, data that I had acquired while overseeing his financial account. I never imagined that I would need it, therefore I had saved it as insurance. Julia. Rachel looked at her screen and interrupted. Donald recently made another attempt to log into our company's servers from the Lake residence. He's becoming desperate. I saw Donald excuse himself to the home office via the camera. My office at home. Our IT staff was prepared when he sat at my desk, most likely attempting to breach my company account once more. They'd established a phony doorway, letting him think he was succeeding. I told Rachel to let him in. Let him believe he is. Because their entire house of cards collapses in around 10 minutes after that board email is sent. Sarah raised her head from her computer. Are your emails ready? Shall I press the send button? I glanced at the security footage one final time. Robert, Donald, and Amber were still rejoicing over their fictitious triumph. Take action. The speed of the response exceeded my expectations. Robert's phone rang through the security stream just minutes after Sarah sent the email. As he listened to what I imagined was the board's initial response, we saw his face become pale. Are you referring to an urgent meeting? He called out into the telephone. What proof was sent by whom? Presumably checking his email, Donald reached for his own phone. He lost the color in his face. She knew the servers. Julia was aware of my attempt to gain access to them. It improves. As we watched the drama play out, I murmured to Sarah, await it. Amber's phone began exploding with alerts just in time. All of the board members had received anonymous, private Facebook messages from her. The ones where she boasted that she had assisted Donald in stealing company data. The precise moment their joy descended into terror was captured on the surveillance camera. Robert yelled into his cell phone. Donald was hurriedly attempting to close his laptop, and Amber was in tears, mascara flowing down her cheeks. The coup de grace followed. Police vehicles driving up to the lake, home, lights blazing. It turns out that financial fraud and business espionage are significant offenses. Who could have known? As we watched via the cameras, I took Emma in my arms and hugged her close. Take a look at that newborn girl. That is the result of others undervaluing your mother. Before the broadcast stopped, the last thing I saw was Donald being released in handcuffs while continuing to yell that the home belonged to him. The aftermath was stunning. Robert and Donald were both dismissed within a day. The board's inquiry revealed years of fraudulent activities in addition to the conspiracy against my firm, which I was unaware of. Amber's promising influencer career was ruined by her involvement in corporate espionage. She had returned to Ohio to live with her parents, as far as I knew. Investigations were conducted and the offshore accounts were blocked. Donald was given back all of the money he had taken, plus interest. As it turns out, trying to steal corporate property is a wonderful way to forfeit any property rights. The deed was moved to my name as it ought to have been from the beginning. Donald made an effort to apologize, sending long emails explaining how he had lost himself and how a younger lady in power had tempted him. I never answered. The divorce documents were unambiguous. He lost everything he attempted to pilfer, plus more. He would never again work in finance because of the proof of his corporate espionage. In my case, following the controversy, even more investors were drawn to my firm because of its moral business practices. We entered markets that were previously controlled by Donald's firm. Customers who had lost trust in established organizations were drawn to us because of our reputation for integrity. We now spend weekends at the lake house, creating new memories with Emma. I sometimes think about Donald's arrogant email with that picture while I'm sitting on the balcony watching her play. He believed he was declaring triumph, but in reality he was only recording the start of his demise. By the way, I saved that email. In my workplace, it is framed, a warning to never underestimate a lady who's established something worth defending.